Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So one of the most common questions I get asked is what do I do with the compost once I've harvested my potatoes? So today's video, what I'm going to focus on is what to do with used compost. We're coming up to the end of the gardening season, we're harvesting a lot of our vegetables and we're coming up with all this used compost. I know a lot of the popular gardeners and some of the TV gardeners will say don't reuse old compost. I'm going to disagree with them. I'm going to show you exactly why, and I'm going to show you what I do with my old compost. So I've just harvested some potatoes out of that bucket. A lot of comments on my when to harvest potatoes video has been what to do with this compost. Now I'm going to show you 5 things to do with it. I've got loads of lovely compost here and I've grown something that's a really heavy feeder. So that's one of the things that you're going to consider. Was the thing that you actually grew a really heavy feeder or not? So potatoes are quite a heavy feeder, and they need a lot of potassium and a lot of phosphorus to grow their roots and the tubers, not so much nitrogen. So this compost will be potentially deficient in those 2 minerals, but it'll be rich in nitrogen. So the first thing on my list for this is the simplest thing to do is just reuse this compost, replenish it with a bit of fresh compost and turn it into a growing medium for something that's going to prefer a nitrogen rich soil. You might notice me use a lot of unbroken down compost and semi-broken down compost. This is the reason why that my compost isn't generally deficient even at the end of a growing season, because I've used a lot of unbroken down stuff. Yes, it's fed the plants through the growing season, but what it's done as well is it's turned into lush compost for the end of the season that you can reuse again. If these potatoes had things like scab in them, some kind of disease, then I wouldn't really use them for growing vegetables in pots again. What I'd be doing is I've got this lawn that I call a lawn sometimes. I'd just spread it across here and I'd fertilise my lawn with it. At the end of the season, this will be a great lawn feed and it'll keep your lawn looking lush all through next year. So that's number 2 on my list. So let's get to number 3 on our list. Now in my greenhouse, I always have a store of seed starting mix, and when you start seeds, your compost wants to be quite poor in terms of nutrition. Generally, seeds shouldn't be exposed to really fertile soils when they're starting off, so something that's really poor in nutrition but just gives them that seed sowing just give them that medium to start in is absolutely perfect. So what I like to do is I like to take all my used compost and I just sieve it through in place. And all these big bits just get dumped onto the beds. So I'll just sift that through. That'll make a really good seed starting mix. I'll add a little bit of sharp sand to this and you'll see look, there's the kind of mix that I already have. That's all homemade compost I'm going to just use to keep on growing year after year. If you make your mix now and expose it, leave it like this, what it's going to do is it's going to continue breaking down. Any big bits that are left in here are going to continue breaking down, and it's going to be perfect when it comes to spring and you're going to be sowing again. If you have plants to mulch that you're going to be growing over winter, this is perfect. So over here I've got some kohlrabi that's in the ground, so I'm just going to spread this out underneath the plants and let this feed my plants through winter, and come spring I'll have some lush growing soil. I'll have some lush looking plants. There you go, absolutely beautiful. Do a bit of weeding while I'm here. If you've got a bed like this that's empty, you could take your used compost and use it to mulch your beds. Come spring, your beds are going to be absolutely lovely and workable, ready for you to grow straight into. Personally, I'm not a fan of laying compost down at autumn time. It's something that people do and it can be done. I prefer to use a combination of heavy mulchers and leave the compost for other things and add the compost to specific planting holes as you need it. So what I'd do, if you did decide to put them on beds, I'd cover them with cardboard. So I'd put a couple of inches of compost down and then cover that with cardboard and let the worms drag that into the soil and break it all down. And it protects, that covering with the cardboard will protect your compost from being, one, washed away by the rain washing all the nutrients out, and the wind blowing away your compost and ending up with nothing. So it's a good way of preserving that compost. So if you do use it as a mulch, do protect it. I know some people will say that it's okay just to leave over winter. I disagree. If your compost is quite poor quality, or there's stuff that hasn't really broken down and you want to break it down further, you could take your compost and add it to an existing compost pile. There's a number of benefits of this. First of all, you're adding bacterial activity to a compost pile and it'll help break your compost down even better. Another one is you're automatically replenishing that compost straight away. You're mixing it with fresh organic matter that's breaking down. You've got this old compost that's spent and you're mixing it all up, and it's going to come out in the spring as fresh, good compost, as good as new, really. So when you've added it to your compost pile, just leave it there and leave it there all winter. Come spring, it'll be fine. A couple of weeks ago, one of my live streams, I mentioned that because of the poor quality of shop bought compost at the moment, a lot of it looks like it's just not gone through the full composting process. This is one of the things that I could recommend, is you get a load of that shop bought compost, stick it in a container like that, cover it up and just leave it to compost even further over winter, and then you'll see by spring you'll have a lovely usable compost. And we shouldn't have to do it. The compost on sale should be good and fit for purpose. We shouldn't have to bring it home and then compost it down even further. But if you're struggling, then do that. Or even just buy a couple of bags and leave them to one side, and by spring they should hopefully have broken down. So the thing I like to do most, and this is one of my favourite things to do actually with used compost, is to take the used compost and mix it with fresh compost. I mean, this has just been harvested, it's quite rough. Mix it together. That compost that I'm talking about, that's quite rough. I normally use that grading of compost as a mulch, but I do harvest it at that stage, and I harvest it for a number of purposes. I usually always have one of these dumpy bags handy, and one of the things that I do really like to do, and this is probably my favourite thing to do, is take your semi-broken down compost and your spent compost, and I just store it in these big dumpy bags. Fill the dumpy bag up, leave it in there. By spring you're going to have a lovely usable batch of compost that you can just, you've got your semi-broken down compost, you've got your used compost, and that's all going to continue breaking down, and you're going to have some amazing stuff to grow in. Now, if you don't have a semi-broken down compost or anything like that, but you want to give your compost a nice kick, this is what I'd use. I'd add some grass clippings to it. So a lot of us are going to be doing those final cuts of autumn right now. So we're going to have a lot of fresh grass clippings. Now add some grass clippings to that mix and leave that to break down. And as you're collecting leaves as well for leaf mould, mix your old compost with fresh leaves, a little bit of grass. A really fast process of making leaf mould without having to do a lot of work, and you're going to have loads of nutrition in there. There's a nice summary of what to do with your used compost at the end of a growing season. Don't just throw it away, don't just chuck it on your beds. There's lots more uses that gardeners like us on a budget that we can put them to, and it'll be a lot more cost effective, and we'll make it into something, it'll just keep us going through that next season a lot easier. This is one of the ways that I keep my costs down every year. I don't have to keep buying new compost over and over again. The only reason I bought a couple of bags last year was to test out how bad compost was for people. A lot of compost can be made at home with just the stuff that you've already got lying around. One last thing before I go as a bonus point is, if you've got a worm bin, take your used compost, add it to your worm bin. Because worms do like a bit of grit and do like a bit of something to help their digestion, that compost that you're going to use, because it's had soil and other things in it, it's got some sandy particles and it's got broken down stones in there. And the worm will turn that into absolutely amazing worm castings. So there's my points on what to do with old compost and how to reuse it. I hope you like what you've seen. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for regular updates. If you like this sort of thing and want to support our channel, why not become a Patreon? I'll leave a link to it at the bottom of this video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.